Aidan Matthews sat at the head of the table, his gaze cool and calculating as he watched Eliza Bennett sitting across from him. The restaurant's plush, dimly lit ambiance contrasted with the chill between them, a chill that had been present ever since he suggested they have dinner here. It wasn't romantic, at least not in the way she expected. Eliza's fingers lightly brushed the edge of her wine glass, her nerves barely masked. She wasn't sure why she was here, but she had an idea. Aidan had been distant lately, their interactions mechanical, lacking the spark she'd hoped for when they first met. His charm was there, but it was the kind that felt rehearsed. It was the same charm that had won her over at first, but now it left her questioning everything. He leaned forward, the soft candlelight flickering in his eyes, creating shadows that made his expression appear even more distant. "Eliza," he began, his voice low and firm, "you and I both know the world doesn't run on fairy tales." Eliza felt her heart skip a beat, confusion rising within her. Was this really happening? She didn't know if she was prepared for this conversation. "I'm not asking you for love," Aidan continued, his gaze not leaving hers. "I'm offering you something far more valuable: security, stability, a partnership that will elevate both of us." Her stomach churned as she processed his words. She had known there was something transactional about their relationship, but hearing it spoken out loud felt like a punch to the gut. She didn't know how to respond. Part of her felt betrayed, but the other part, the part that had always been logical, was tempted by the very thing he was offering: security. "I need someone who can help me maintain my image," Aidan continued, his tone almost clinical. "Someone who understands the role they're meant to play." Eliza's hands tightened around her glass, her knuckles white. She had come into this dinner hoping for an explanation, but this wasn't what she'd expected. Her mind raced, torn between the allure of everything he was offering and the sinking feeling that she was about to make a decision she would regret. He looked at her with an expression that was hard to read, his lips curling into something that could almost be mistaken for a smile. "I'm asking you to marry me, Eliza. Not out of love, but out of practicality. Together we could build something extraordinary, and in exchange I can promise you everything you've ever wanted." Eliza swallowed hard. It was the deal of a lifetime, but at what cost? She looked down at her plate, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing stood out above the rest. Was this really all she was worth to him? Was she simply a pawn in his calculated world? I need time to think," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Aidan's expression didn't change. "Take all the time you need, but remember, time is something we don't have in abundance." As he stood up to leave, he offered her a brief, cool smile. It wasn't a promise of love, nor a gesture of affection. It was a business deal, and for Aidan Matthews, that was enough. Eliza sat back, her heart heavy, feeling more alone than she had ever felt. Eliza paced the small apartment, the weight of Aidan's proposal still fresh in her mind. His words echoed in her head. "This isn't about love, Eliza. It's about securing our futures." Her heart twisted with confusion. What kind of marriage was that? What kind of life was she agreeing to? She tried to push the thoughts aside as she settled at her desk, opening a book for distraction, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept going back to the look on Aidan's face, that cold, calculating expression. It wasn't love. It wasn't even the beginning of love. It was something else, something she wasn't sure she could accept. Maxwell had always warned her about people like Aidan, about how money could turn even the most well-meaning person into someone unrecognizable. But even he wouldn't have predicted this. She had been so swept up in the idea of a perfect life, a secure life, that she never stopped to think about what she was truly giving up. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her from her thoughts. It was a message from Aidan. He'd sent her an email, just as he had promised. It was meant to clarify the details of their partnership. She opened it hesitantly, not sure what she was hoping to find, but what she found sent a chill down her spine. In the email, Aidan outlined their financial plans, how they would manage their money, how their future would be structured. There was talk of public appearances, business ventures, and a carefully cultivated image. There was no mention of love, of intimacy, of shared experiences. It was business, cold, calculated, and precise. The email included a statement that made her stomach churn. This marriage will cement our position in the social and business world. You will play a key role in maintaining the public perception of our partnership. Eliza stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. She felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Aiden had never spoken directly about it, but the reality was clear. She was nothing more than an accessory to him. A strategic move, a cog in his machine. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, dialing Aiden's number. It rang a few times before he answered. Eliza? His voice was casual, almost too casual, as though nothing was wrong. Aiden, she said, her voice tight. I need to talk to you now. There was a brief pause, then a sigh. I thought we'd already talked, Eliza. What's on your mind? She could barely contain the fury building in her chest. I saw the email, she said, her voice rising. I saw how you've planned everything. The business, the image, the partnership. But there's nothing about us. There's nothing about love. Aiden's tone shifted slightly. Eliza, you knew this was going to be a practical arrangement. Why are you upset now? Upset? She almost laughed, the irony of it too much to handle. You think you can just tell me we're in this for practical reasons? That I'm some business asset? There was silence on the other end, and Eliza could almost hear him calculating his response. Finally he spoke, his voice cold again. I didn't think you'd be so emotional about it. We're both getting what we want here, Eliza. What's the problem? The problem, she said, struggling to keep her composure, is that you've never seen me for who I am. Not really. You see me as a part of your plan, your image. But I'm not an image, Aiden. I'm a person. Aiden didn't answer immediately. She could hear the faint sound of movement in the background, his usual calm demeanor faltering for a moment. When he spoke again, it was softer, almost regretful, but it didn't ease the ache in her chest. I'm doing what I think is best for both of us, Eliza. I didn't want it to go like this. I thought you'd understand. I don't, she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't understand you at all. The line went dead. Eliza sat in the silence of her apartment, staring at the phone in her hand, the words still ringing in her ears. How had she not seen it before? How had she allowed herself to believe in something that wasn't real? A bitter laugh escaped her lips. She had been foolish, hoping for love in a relationship built on convenience. But it was over now. The weeks that followed Aiden's cold proposal felt like they existed in a different world altogether. Eliza moved through the days mechanically, her emotions locked away in a deep, unfamiliar place. The mansion, which should have felt like a home, felt more like a gilded cage. The lavish decor, the marble floors, the grand chandeliers, none of it mattered. It was all just an extension of Aiden's empire, a world where she didn't belong. Aiden, too, was distant. They barely spoke unless it was about something practical, business, social appearances, or the occasional passing comment about how the house needed new curtains or the staff had a minor issue. Eliza often found herself in the kitchen late at night, staring at the glow of her phone as if waiting for something, anything to change. But nothing ever did. She could feel the isolation creeping in, the silence between them becoming louder with every passing day. They hadn't shared a meal together in days. The once promising mornings where they'd sip coffee and talk about their dreams now felt like distant memories. Aiden would leave early for work, and Eliza would find herself once again, alone. At first, she tried to stay busy, reading, writing, even exploring the city. But no matter how hard she tried, the emptiness followed her everywhere. One evening, she found herself at the dining table alone again. The staff had prepared a lavish meal, but her appetite had long since evaporated. As she sat staring at the untouched plate of food, she realized how strange this all felt. How had it come to this? She was married to a man she barely knew, in a house that didn't feel like home. A marriage built on what? Security? Image? It didn't feel real. Not anymore. The door creaked open behind her, and she turned to see Aiden standing in the doorway. He looked as he always did, sharp, confident, and slightly out of reach. His eyes, though, held something different today, something almost uncertain. But the moment passed quickly, and his usual cool demeanor took over. "Eliza," he began, his voice smooth, but there was a hint of something else in it now. "Are you planning on eating or just sitting here thinking about things?" Eliza didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure what to say. What was there to say? They had both known the truth from the start. This marriage was a deal, nothing more. And yet, despite all that, something in her wanted more. She didn't want to be here in this cold, sterile space, pretending everything was fine. "I'm not hungry," she replied softly, her voice quiet but firm. Aiden lingered for a moment, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for something. "Okay," he finally said, his voice returning to its usual level of detachment. "I'm sure you'll come around." Eliza felt a sharp pang of frustration. He was so dismissive, so disconnected. It was like she was invisible to him. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she had allowed this. She had let him convince her that this was all there was, a partnership, a calculated decision. But it wasn't enough. Not for her. "I'm not coming around, Aiden," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm here, but I'm not here, you know? This marriage, it's not what I imagined. It's not what I need." Aiden didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? "You knew what this was when we signed up for it," he said, his tone hardening slightly. "This is what we both agreed on. What do you want from me, Eliza?" "I want to feel like I matter," she whispered, the weight of her words crashing down on her. There was silence between them for a long moment. Aiden stood there, arms crossed, studying her with an unreadable expression. Finally, he broke the silence with a sigh. "I'm doing what I think is best for both of us. We'll get through this," he said, his voice distant again, as though the conversation had never really mattered to him. Eliza watched him walk away, feeling the space between them grow larger. She didn't know if it was possible to fix what was broken. She didn't know if she even wanted to try anymore. But as the night stretched on and the quiet settled in, one thing became clear. She was no longer just playing a role in his world. She had started to see the cracks. And whether he wanted to admit it or not, so had he. Eliza stared at the screen of her phone, the message in front of her still making her heart race. Aiden's email, intended to be about their plans for an upcoming charity event, had, by accident or not, revealed something far more unsettling. The subject line seemed innocent enough, our upcoming project discussion. But as her eyes scanned the contents, her breath caught in her throat. Aiden had forwarded an email to his assistant that she was never supposed to see. It outlined their next steps in managing the public perception of their marriage. "The goal," the message read, "is to project Eliza as the ideal wife for Aiden Matthews, elegant, reserved, but always supportive. She must be seen as the perfect match, a key part of the brand. She can work as a librarian, but only if it fits the narrative. Otherwise, we make sure to keep her out of the spotlight." Eliza felt her stomach drop. She had always known deep down that Aiden had a carefully curated image. But to see it laid out like this, to see herself reduced to a mere asset in his portfolio, was like a slap in the face. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down on the table. How could he? How could he betray her trust like this, reducing their marriage to an act, a calculated move for appearances? She felt sick to her core, the reality of their situation sinking in like ice water. Aiden hadn't married her out of love. He had married her because she fit the role, the plan, the idea of the perfect wife, the perfect life, the perfect picture. Eliza wasn't a partner. She was a tool, an image. The shock left her speechless for a moment, sitting in silence as her emotions swirled. Then, without thinking, she grabbed her phone and dialed Aiden's number. The line rang once, twice. Then he picked up. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Eliza, what's going on?" he asked, sounding distracted. "Why did you send me this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. "Why is it that in your plans for our future, I'm just another part of your brand?" There was a pause on the other end. Aiden didn't answer immediately. Then, as if he had rehearsed his response, he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Aiden," she snapped, the betrayal cutting through her like a knife. "I saw the email," You've been treating me like I'm some kind of prop in your perfect life. You don't see me, Aiden. Not really. You see only what I can give you, what I can help you project. A perfect wife, a perfect image, nothing more. Aiden's tone shifted slightly, though still smooth, still calculated. Eliza, I told you from the start that this marriage wasn't going to be a fairy tale. It's a partnership. We're in this together, aren't we? You knew what you were signing up for? Eliza's breath caught in her throat. I thought I was marrying you for something real, Aiden. I thought you saw me. I thought you saw us. There was a long silence. Then Aiden spoke again, but his voice lacked the warmth she had hoped for. You knew the rules, Eliza. This is how it works. This is how it has to work. There's no room for emotion here, only results. Her chest tightened. She hung up the phone before he could say anything else. Eliza sank back in her chair, her eyes blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She had been foolish to think this could turn into something real. She had let herself believe that a life built on appearances could somehow grow into something more. But now, everything was clear. She was nothing but a pawn in Aiden's game. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could feel was the sting of betrayal, deep and unforgiving. Every second that ticked by felt like a weight pressing on her chest, suffocating her. How could she have been so blind? She had given up so much of herself, all for a man who saw her as a means to an end. She wasn't sure what to do now. Leave? Stay? It didn't matter. She felt invisible in this marriage, and now the truth was out. There was no pretending anymore. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She wouldn't cry. Not for him. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't pick it up. The message from Aiden could wait. She needed to decide what came next. But first she needed to remind herself of something. This was her life, not his. Aiden sat in his car outside the San Francisco Public Library, staring at the building that seemed so foreign to him now. His fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel. He had driven by the library dozens of times, but never had it felt so important. The truth hit him hard in the days following his confrontation with Eliza. Her words, "You don't see me, Aiden, not really," echoed in his mind, refusing to let him go. He had tried to justify his actions, to tell himself that everything he did was for them, for their future, for their stability. But somewhere, deep inside, he knew he had been wrong. Eliza had every right to feel betrayed. He had used her. No, worse, he had never seen her as an equal. She had been a tool in his grand plan, a way to project the perfect image. He'd treated her like an accessory, and now the weight of that reality was crushing him. He hadn't realized until it was too late, but his obsession with power and status had blinded him. He had built his empire with cold calculation, but love, true love, was something he hadn't even considered. Now, sitting in the car, Aiden knew he had to do something. He had to change, not for his reputation, not for his business, but for Eliza. He had to prove to her that he wasn't the man he used to be. He had to show her that he could love her the way she deserved to be loved. With a deep breath, he opened the car door and stepped out. The library's doors loomed ahead, a symbol of everything he had avoided in the past. It was her world, her sanctuary. If he was going to show Eliza he could change, he had to start by stepping into her world. As he walked toward the entrance, he wondered what he was doing here. What was he supposed to say? He wasn't a reader. He barely understood the value of books beyond the occasional business-related one, but he was willing to try, for her. Inside, the smell of old books and polished wood filled the air. Aiden looked around, feeling out of place. The shelves seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with words that felt foreign to him. His gaze scanned the room, searching for Eliza, but she wasn't in sight. His heart sank a little. He had hoped to find her here, to have this conversation face to face. But instead, he had to settle for walking around, feeling like an imposter in a world he knew nothing about. Just as he was about to leave, a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. Aiden? He turned quickly, and there she was, Eliza. She looked surprised to see him, her eyes narrowing as she took in his presence. There was a guardedness about her now, something he had never noticed before. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice soft but wary. Aiden hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind, But now that it was here, the words didn't come easily. I wanted to see this place, he finally said, his voice awkward. I wanted to understand your world, Eliza. The world you love. Eliza's eyebrows shot up, and for a moment he saw a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. She was skeptical, and he didn't blame her. He had never shown this side of himself to her before. He had always been the man of business, the man of cold logic. But now he was trying to be something else, something real. I thought you didn't care about this stuff, she replied, her tone sharp but not unkind. I thought you were only in it for the show. Aiden winced. Her words stung, but they were true. He had been all about the show. I've been wrong about a lot of things, he said, looking her in the eyes. But I'm trying to change, Eliza. I can't keep pretending I don't care about you, about what you care about. I know I've hurt you. I don't want to keep making the same mistakes. Eliza studied him for a long moment, and for the first time in weeks, Aiden felt exposed. He had no facade, no plan. It was just him standing in front of her, hoping she would see that he was trying. I don't know if I can believe that yet, Aiden, she said quietly. I don't know if you can change. Aiden nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had no right to expect her to believe him immediately. It would take time, but he was willing to wait, to do whatever it took to prove that he could be the man she needed. I'll wait, Eliza, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability he felt. I'll wait as long as it takes. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their unspoken words hanging between them. And though he hadn't fixed everything, though he knew this was just the beginning, Aiden felt something shift inside him. He wasn't the man he had been before. He was trying, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Aiden's usual confident stride had faltered when he entered the office that morning. The weight of his recent actions had been pressing on him for days, but today it felt unbearable. He could hear the relentless ticking of the clock, the soft hum of his office, as if the world was moving on without him. Yet he stood still, paralyzed by a sense of impending doom. He had spent years building his empire, his reputation. He had convinced himself that success was the only thing that mattered. But now, the pieces of that empire seemed hollow. He had everything he ever wanted: money, power, respect. Yet standing in the middle of his high-rise office, he felt emptier than ever before. His thoughts kept returning to Eliza, to the confrontation that had shattered everything. I thought I was doing what was best for us, he muttered to himself, pacing the room. But I've ruined it all. The words hung in the air, a painful reminder of his failings. His mind flashed back to their conversation in the library, her face filled with disbelief, anger, and hurt. I thought you saw me, Aiden, she had said. But you never did you? He clenched his fists, trying to shake off the guilt gnawing at him. She had been right. He had never truly seen her. Not for who she was, not for what she needed. He had been so focused on himself, on his image, that he had ignored the woman who had stood beside him. Aiden collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His breath was shallow, his heart racing. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every situation, to bend the world to his will. But this was beyond his control. This wasn't business. This was real, and he wasn't prepared for it. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from Catherine, his business partner, reminding him about an important meeting that afternoon. He stared at the message, his eyes unfocused. His mind was elsewhere, far away to a place where he could fix the damage he had caused. But he knew he couldn't. He couldn't just fix this like he fixed a business deal. The damage wasn't something you could patch up with a few clever words and a polished presentation. No, this was personal, and he had no idea how to make it right. His phone buzzed again, this time a call from his assistant. He let it ring out, ignoring the interruption. The last thing he wanted right now was to deal with business. But that was all he knew. He had built his life on it. But it wasn't enough anymore. Aiden stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window and looked out over the city, trying to calm the storm inside him. The view was stunning, the skyline stretching out in every direction, bathed in the early afternoon sunlight. But all he saw was a world that seemed so far out of reach now. He wanted to fix it, to fix her, but how? How could he convince Eliza that he wasn't the man she thought he was? That he was willing to change, to be the man she needed? The phone rang again, and this time he picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. "Aiden," the voice on the other end said, "the meeting's in 30 minutes. Are you ready?" Aiden took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. He needed to be the businessman again, the leader who commanded the room. He couldn't let this weakness consume him, not in front of his team, not in front of anyone. But as he walked toward the door, a single thought lingered in his mind. "I'm losing her, and I don't know how to get her back." Eliza packed her suitcase with mechanical precision, each item folded and placed with care. Yet her mind raced. She hadn't told Aiden, hadn't even told Maxwell. She just needed to go. She couldn't stay in this house another day, trapped in a life she never signed up for. A life where she was nothing more than an accessory to a plan she never understood. She thought she had prepared herself for everything. When she agreed to marry Aiden, she believed they could build something together. Something real. Something that could be hers as much as it was his. But now the reality was unbearable. The constant feeling of being unseen, of being used, had chipped away at her spirit until she could hardly recognize the woman in the mirror. The sound of a door opening broke her train of thought. Aiden's footsteps echoed down the hallway, and her heart skipped. She froze for a moment, her hand still on the zipper of her suitcase. She didn't know what to do. Part of her wanted to turn around, tell him everything she was feeling, beg him to understand. But the other part of her was already certain that nothing would change. Not now, not after everything he had done. Aiden knocked softly at the door. "Eliza?" His voice, once warm, once comforting, now felt like a stranger's. She didn't answer right away, trying to collect herself, but she knew he'd press. He always did. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I thought we could talk." Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. He didn't get it. He never had. He still thought they could just talk their way out of this. But how could they? How could they rebuild what had been broken by his manipulations, by his refusal to see her as a person, as an equal? She finally turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, her voice cold, distant. She couldn't let him see the cracks forming, the doubt that gnawed at her every waking hour. Aiden stepped into the room, his expression concerned but unreadable. "Eliza," he began, his voice gentle, "we need to talk about what happened. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us. Fix them." The words stung. How could he say that so casually, as if it were just a matter of snapping his fingers and everything would be okay? She had heard his promises before, empty words that dissolved in the air. Nothing ever changed. She didn't know if she had the strength to hope for a change anymore. "I'm not sure what there is to fix anymore," Eliza said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You've already made your choices, Aiden. You've already made it clear where I stand in all of this." Aiden took a step closer, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean? This is about us, about our future together. I told you I'm willing to change. I want to make this work. I need to leave," she interrupted, her voice firm now. "I can't keep pretending that everything is fine. I need time. Time away from here, from everything that we've built." Aiden blinked, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you talking about? You can't just leave. You can't leave me now." "I'm not leaving you, Aiden," she said, shaking her head slowly. "I'm leaving for me, to figure out who I am, what I really want. I need to be alone." Aiden stepped back as though she had struck him, his face a mixture of hurt and confusion. "I don't understand," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Eliza, please don't do this. I know I've been wrong, but I can't fix it if you leave." Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "You can't fix this. You can't fix me by keeping me here. I need to find my own way out of this." She paused, her gaze lingering on him, as if searching for something, some sign that he understood, but there was nothing in his eyes, just the same coldness she had seen for months. "I need to go," she repeated softly. Without another word, Eliza turned back to her suitcase, finished packing and zipped it up. The finality of the moment felt heavy in the air, but she knew it was the right decision. She couldn't stay in a marriage where she felt invisible. She couldn't keep pretending that everything would be fine if she just waited long enough. "I'll be gone for a while," Eliza said, her voice steadier now. "I'll be staying with Maxwell." She could hear the soft shuffle of his footsteps as he remained in the doorway, not knowing what to say next. His silence echoed louder than any words he could have spoken. As she picked up her suitcase and headed toward the door, a wave of fear and relief washed over her. It wasn't easy, but she had made a choice. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of freedom. "Goodbye, Aiden," she said softly before walking out the door. Eliza sat quietly on the edge of the bed in Maxwell's apartment, her suitcase still beside her, half unpacked. The events of the last few days felt like a blur. Her sudden departure from Aiden's house, the raw emotion of their confrontation, and now the silence that filled Maxwell's apartment. She hadn't expected this break to feel so empty. She had told herself she was leaving to find herself again, to rediscover who she was without the shadow of Aiden's life looming over her. But now that she was here, it wasn't as simple as she had imagined. Maxwell had been kind enough to offer her a space to stay for as long as she needed, but Eliza couldn't shake the feeling of being lost. She had always been so sure of her life, of her purpose, but now she was unsure. Was this really her chance for a fresh start, or was she running away from something she wasn't ready to face? Sitting in the quiet room, her mind wandered to the books that filled her shelves, the ones she had accumulated over the years, the ones that had always given her comfort. And then it hit her. She hadn't been reading much since moving in with Aiden. In fact, she hadn't really written anything in a long time either. Writing had always been her escape, the one thing she did just for herself, but somewhere along the way, she had buried that part of herself. Eliza picked up a notebook from the bedside table. It was an old journal, the pages yellowing with time. She opened it, flipping through the pages filled with fragments of stories, poems, and random thoughts. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed writing. But it wasn't just writing. There was something else, something deeper that she had been pushing away all these years. Eliza had always felt a pull to creativity, to something beyond the routine of her life at the library. But she had let herself forget that part of her, convinced that her role in Aiden's world was the only one that mattered. Now, as she read through the words she had written months ago, she felt something shift inside her. She had been more than just the quiet librarian. She had dreams too, dreams of stories, of creating something bigger than herself, something that was purely hers. Maxwell knocked on the door, interrupting her thoughts. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, poking his head inside. Eliza looked up, her eyes slightly red from the weight of the emotions she hadn't allowed herself to fully feel until now. "I think I've been running from more than just Aiden," she said softly, her voice unsteady. Maxwell raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "What do you mean?" "I've been running from this," she replied, holding up the notebook. "From the part of me that wants something more. I'm not just a librarian. I'm not just Aiden's wife. I have this whole world inside me that I've been ignoring." Maxwell sat down next to her, his expression thoughtful. "You've always been more than what people see, Eliza. You just have to let yourself see it too." Eliza looked down at the notebook in her hands. It wasn't just the words on the pages. It was the act of creating, of reclaiming something she had lost in the process of trying to be everything for someone else. "I've been so focused on other people's expectations," she murmured, the realization settling in, "on being who I thought I was supposed to be, that I forgot who I actually am." Maxwell smiled warmly. "It's not too late to change that. You can be whoever you want to be. This is your time, Eliza." Her heart began to race with a new sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of excitement about her future. She wasn't sure what the next steps would look like, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't keep hiding from her own potential. She wouldn't hide from herself anymore. Eliza opened the journal and began writing, the words flowing freely as she let herself get lost in the world she had almost forgotten. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her earlier seemed to melt away, replaced by a quiet confidence she hadn't realized she still had. She didn't need to figure everything out today. but she was starting to remember what it felt like to live for herself, and that, she realized, was enough. Eliza's phone buzzed on the small table in front of her, breaking the silence that had consumed her for the past few days. She had spent the last week in the quiet sanctuary of Maxwell's apartment, her mind swirling with thoughts of what her life had been and what it might become. Writing had given her some peace, but the weight of her past, of Aiden, still clung to her like a second skin. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the phone before she picked it up. It was a message from an unknown number. "Eliza, it's Catherine. We need to talk." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. Catherine, Aiden's business partner, a woman who had always been just a little too friendly, too interested in the details of Eliza's life. She never quite trusted her, but never had a reason to be suspicious. Until now. She quickly typed a response, her fingers trembling as she did. "What is this about?" Catherine's reply came quickly. "I know what's been going on and we need to clear the air. I'll be at the usual place in an hour." The usual place was a cafe they had all visited together, a neutral ground where business deals were discussed over overpriced lattes. Eliza frowned. She didn't want to see Catherine. She didn't want to confront this part of her life, but she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. When Eliza arrived, she spotted Catherine immediately. She was sitting in the corner booth, her posture poised and confident, as always. But today, something about her seemed different. There was a sharpness to her eyes, an almost predatory glint that made Eliza uneasy. "Eliza," Catherine said with a tight smile, gesturing for her to sit. "I'm glad you came." Eliza slid into the seat across from her, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "What's going on, Catherine? Why the sudden message?" Catherine leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Aiden's not what you think he is. Not the man you thought he was when you married him. You've seen the cracks, haven't you? The way he's changed since you left." Eliza's heart sank. She knew what Catherine was hinting at, but she didn't want to believe it. "What do you mean by that?" Catherine's smile faltered for a moment, then returned. "I know Aiden, Eliza. I know his type. He's been using you all along. But the truth is, he's not capable of real love. He's too focused on himself. I'm just trying to help you see that." Eliza stared at her, a cold chill running down her spine. "I don't need your help, Catherine. You're not telling me anything I don't already know. Aiden's made his choices and I've made mine." But Catherine wasn't done. "You think you can just walk away and that everything will be fine? It's not that easy. He's not going to let you go so easily. And I've been watching it happen. He's spiraling, Eliza, and he won't stop until he has you back under his control." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" Catherine leaned in even closer, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm saying Aiden can't lose, not to anyone, not to you, not to anyone else. And he'll do whatever it takes to make sure that you don't have a future outside of him. He's already planning his next move." A sick feeling began to rise in Eliza's stomach. Catherine's words, though chilling, struck a nerve. She had known there was something manipulative about Aiden, but hearing it confirmed by someone so close to him, someone who had seen the darker sides of his world, made her blood run cold. "You're lying," Eliza whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "You're trying to turn me against him." Catherine smirked, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of amusement and something darker. "You think I'm lying? You think this is about me wanting something from you? No, Eliza, this is about survival. I'm warning you because you're too emotionally invested. You think you can walk away and just live your life, but Aiden won't let that happen. He'll destroy anyone who stands in his way, and right now, you are in his way." The weight of her words hit Eliza hard. She had seen Aiden's obsession with success before, but had she really been so blind to the lengths he would go to maintain control? "Why are you telling me this?" Eliza asked, her voice strained. Catherine leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable. "Because I don't want you to be another casualty. You're not the first woman to fall for his charm, and you won't be the last. But I'm giving you a chance to get out while you still can." Eliza stood up abruptly, her hands trembling. She had heard enough. "I don't need your warnings, Catherine. I've made my decision." Catherine's eyes narrowed, a thin smile curling on her lips. "I hope you're ready for what comes next, Eliza." Without another word, Eliza turned and walked out of the cafe, the weight of Catherine's words following her like a shadow. Aiden was more dangerous than she had ever realized, but she wasn't going to be his pawn anymore. The air in the room was thick with tension as Aiden waited for Eliza to arrive. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He knew this moment was inevitable. He had tried to fix things, to change, to prove he was worthy of her trust again, but nothing had worked. Catherine's words haunted him. Eliza had been right to leave. He had pushed her too far, manipulated her too much. But now, he was about to face the consequences. Eliza walked into the room, her presence commanding yet calm. She had been gone for over a week, staying with Maxwell, keeping her distance from him. Her silence spoke volumes. She had seen through him, and now he was left with nothing but the broken pieces of their relationship. "Eliza," he said, his voice shaky but determined. He needed to make her understand. "We need to talk. I've been thinking." She cut him off with a sharp look. "No, Aiden. You've had your chances. I'm done listening to your excuses." Her words hit him like a slap, but he wasn't ready to give up. "I'm not making excuses," he said quickly, stepping toward her. "I'm trying to explain. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not that person anymore. I've changed. Please, you have to believe me." Eliza took a step back, crossing her arms over her chest. "Changed?" Her voice was laced with disbelief. "How? By showing up here and pretending everything is fine? By telling me that you love me when you've never even seen me for who I really am?" Aiden's chest tightened. She was right. He hadn't seen her, not truly. "I know I've failed you, but I've spent this time away from you, thinking about everything I've done. I've realized how wrong I was. I was so obsessed with success, with my image, that I forgot what really matters. You matter. You always mattered." Eliza shook her head, her expression hardening. "You don't get it, Aiden. You never got it. This wasn't about your image or your success. It was about us. It was about seeing me as something more than just a part of your life that you can control." Aiden felt his throat tighten. He had always been in control. Always. But now, for the first time, he realized that control had come at the expense of everything he had truly wanted. "I see that now," he whispered, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "But it's too late, isn't it? I can't undo what I've done. All I can do is ask you to give me a chance to make it right." Eliza looked at him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Her eyes, once filled with love, were now filled with a quiet sadness that he couldn't ignore. "You don't get to decide when it's too late, Aiden. I've already made my decision." Aiden's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? You can't just walk away from this." "I'm not walking away," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm choosing to walk away from you, from everything you've made me believe in. I deserve more than what you've offered me, Aiden. I deserve more than being a pawn in your game, being part of your image. I deserve real love, not this." Aiden stood frozen, the weight of her words crashing down on him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She was leaving. For good. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she said, her voice softer now, but just as resolute. "But I need to move on. I need to find myself again, without you, without this." Aiden opened his mouth to say something, to stop her, but the words didn't come. He wanted to tell her he loved her, that he would change, that they could fix everything. But deep down, he knew it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "Goodbye, Aiden," Eliza said, her voice breaking slightly as she turned to leave. "I hope one day you'll understand what you lost." Aiden stood motionless, watching her walk away. The door clicked softly behind her, and in that moment, something inside him broke. Something deep. Something that could never be fixed by success, or money, or image. He had lost the one thing that truly mattered, and he had no one to blame but himself. As the silence enveloped him, Aiden finally understood. Love wasn't a business deal. Love wasn't about control. It was about seeing the other person, truly seeing them for who they were, and he had never done that. Now, with Eliza gone, the emptiness that had always lurked in the corners of his heart felt more profound than ever. Eliza sat on the balcony of Maxwell's apartment, the cool evening breeze brushing against her skin. The city sprawled beneath her, alive with lights and motion, but she felt miles away from it all. She had never expected to feel so empty. It was as though the past few months had been a blur, a dream she had woken from only to find herself alone. Her mind kept returning to the moment she walked away from Aiden. She had done it for herself, but the weight of it still lingered, heavy on her chest. She had chosen to walk away from a life that no longer served her, from a marriage that had been nothing more than a well-crafted illusion. But in that moment, when she closed the door behind her, she felt the absence of something she couldn't quite name. A knock on the door startled her, and she turned to see Maxwell standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You've been quiet today," he said softly, stepping inside. "Anything on your mind?" Eliza hesitated, then shook her head. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in her since she left Aiden. She had thought she was reclaiming her independence, that she was taking control of her own future. But now, it all felt uncertain. Maxwell sat next to her, his presence grounding. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" Eliza didn't answer at first, but her silence was enough. Maxwell sighed. "You know, it's okay to still care. Even if you've walked away, it's okay to be conflicted." "I don't know what I'm feeling anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but now, everything just feels like it's unraveling." Maxwell looked at her, his gaze steady. "What are you really afraid of, Eliza?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on the pain of walking away, on the uncertainty of her decision, that she hadn't stopped to think about what she was truly afraid of. She looked out over the city, searching for an answer. "I'm afraid I've made a mistake," she finally admitted. "I thought leaving would give me clarity, but now I'm just more lost. I've been so focused on what Aiden did to me, on how he treated me, that I didn't realize what I was walking away from. I didn't realize how much of myself I had invested in him, in that life." Maxwell nodded slowly. "You can't undo what's been done, but you can still move forward. It's okay to acknowledge that part of you loved him. That part of you wanted it to work. But you've got to let go of that expectation now. He can't be the person you need him to be." Eliza felt tears welling up in her eyes. She hadn't allowed herself to feel this vulnerable in a long time. "I don't know how to let go. I don't know how to move on from all of it." Maxwell reached over and placed a hand on hers. "You're not alone in this, Eliza. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. You can rebuild piece by piece." Just then, her phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. Eliza glanced at the screen and her heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Aiden. "I know you need space, but I can't keep pretending like I'm okay. I'm sorry for everything, Eliza. I want to be better for you. Please, give me a chance to prove it." Eliza stared at the message, her hands trembling. She didn't know what to feel. A part of her wanted to believe him, to let him back in. But another part of her, the part that had spent so long feeling unseen, unimportant, knew better. She had to protect herself. She had to honor the person she was becoming, not the person she had been when she was with him. Maxwell watched her silently, sensing the inner conflict brewing inside her. "You don't have to answer right away," he said gently. "Take your time. You're not obligated to go back to what was. You're allowed to choose what's best for you now." Eliza took a deep breath, her fingers still gripping the phone. For the first time, she realized that the power to move forward lay in her hands. She didn't need to fix Aiden. She needed to fix herself. And that started with making choices that honored her own worth. She typed a message back to Aiden, her fingers steady as she composed her words. "I can't go back to the way things were. I need to focus on myself now. I hope you find what you're looking for, but I can't be part of it anymore." She hit send, her heart pounding in her chest as the message disappeared into the ether. She had made the decision. It wasn't about Aiden anymore. It was about her. Maxwell smiled softly at her, a quiet understanding passing between them. Eliza felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally in control of her own future. And that future, she realized, was hers to create. Eliza stood in front of the small, cozy cafe, her heart beating a little faster than usual. The morning sun was soft, casting a warm glow over the world, and for the first time in months she felt at peace. She had found herself in the quiet corners of this city, hidden away from the chaos of her past, from Aiden, from the person she used to be. It had been 3 months since she'd left him, and she hadn't looked back. Not once. The hurt had faded, and what remained was a sense of clarity, of strength, and of possibility. She had stepped out of the cage she had built for herself, and was finally free to live for her own sake. She pushed open the door of the cafe, the little bell above it jingling softly as she entered. The familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries greeted her. Maxwell was already sitting at a corner table, his usual relaxed demeanor making him easy to spot. He waved her over with a wide grin. "Hey, you look good," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Eliza smiled as she sat down. "I feel good," she replied, her voice steady with the confidence that had slowly built up over the past few months. "I never thought I'd say that." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "What, that you feel good? Or that you're finally free of Aiden?" "Both," she said with a chuckle. "It's like I'm not weighed down anymore. Not by him, not by any of it." There was a sense of satisfaction in her voice that made Maxwell smile. "You've come a long way, Eliza. I'm proud of you." Eliza paused, thinking for a moment. "It's funny. I spent so long thinking that I couldn't move forward without him, that he was the key to my future. But now I see that the key was always with me." Maxwell nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's easy to get lost in someone else's life, to forget about your own, but you found yours again." Eliza leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the bustling street outside. There was a new sense of freedom in the air. She had found her way back to herself, rediscovered her love for writing, and started pursuing the dreams she had put on hold for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was hers, and for the first time, she didn't need anyone else to validate it. "I'm thinking of starting a new project," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Something for me, not for anyone else, not for any other reason, just for me." Maxwell smiled. "That's amazing. What kind of project?" "I'm going to write a book," Eliza said with determination. "A story, one that's all mine. No more hiding behind anyone else's expectations. No more playing roles. Just me and my words." The idea had been building in her for weeks, and now it felt like the right time to finally take the plunge. She had spent so long being a character in someone else's story, Aiden's story, that she had almost forgotten that she had her own to tell. It was time to put her life on paper, to give her voice the space it deserved. Maxwell's face broke into a wide grin. "I think it's exactly what you need, and I can't wait to read it." Eliza laughed softly. "I'm not sure I'm ready to share it yet, but I'll get there." She felt a sense of excitement stir inside her at the thought of it. Writing had always been her sanctuary, her way of escaping the world and finding a piece of herself. But this time, she wasn't writing to escape. She was writing to embrace, to tell her own truth. For so long, she'd been trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers. She had tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect image, the perfect partner. But now, she knew that the only perfection she needed was the one that came from being true to herself. Maxwell watched her with a knowing smile. "You've got this, Eliza, and I'm right here if you need anything." She smiled back, her heart lighter than it had ever been. "Thank you, Maxwell. I don't think I could have done this without you." There was a comfort in the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this journey. She had her own path to follow now, but the people who truly cared about her, like Maxwell, would always be there to support her along the way. Eliza took a deep breath, the possibilities of the future opening up before her like a blank page. She was ready to write her own story, ready to live her own life, and for the first time, she felt truly alive. As she sipped her coffee, she couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning.